What's happening, financial coaches? It's Pete here. Want to talk to you today about something that comes up. And invariably, as you are working with clients, some of the clients are not going to hear what you are saying or going to ignore it or not believe it or not do it. Sometimes you will give some very direct advice, hey, you should do this, or this is the right information. What you are operating on is wrong information or bad assumptions or whatever it might be. And so this has happened to me. It happens to everyone, and it probably happens in real life all the time, right? That's why people make mistakes despite the fact that they are warned beforehand, right? Don't touch that. That's hot. Ooh, I touched it. I burned myself, those types of things. But in financial coaching, these things can come up because, I did a video about hard and fast rules. And one of the things that happens in this industry and many industries is that there are these rules, never lease a car, buy a house, buy real estate, right? Any type, numerous things, right? Absolutely go to college, finance college, whatever. There are all sorts of rules that people get in their head. It gets ingrained in them. They believe them as rules, and sometimes they block out discussions around the exceptions. A lot of times when I'm talking about investments, and I've been doing investments for a long time, that this is an area where people have some sort of hard and fast rule, right? Only focus on the fees or the expenses, right? Never use a fee-based financial planner. It can be any of these types of things, right? Only invest in what you know. Now, some of this advice is generally pretty good guidance. Generally, it fits most people, but sometimes, depending on where people are at, it might not be appropriate for them for a number of reasons that I've talked about in some other videos. So, what happens when you are talking to a client and you are giving them some advice, maybe giving them some direction, giving them some explicit direction, sometimes giving them correct information that they are ignoring for whatever reason. From our perspective as a financial coach, it seems like they aren't listening to it, they aren't hearing it, or they are just disregarding it. So what can you do in these cases? Now, this is not something that has a simple, if you do this, this will solve it. This will kind of break through to them. This will get their attention, but it's something that I usually do. So, first of all, one of the big reasons that a lot of people will tune out things that might go against the grain for them is because they have just heard it. As I've said, it's a rule to them. It's a law of the universe. And when you are saying something that contradicts it, they are just so conditioned to it that they just kind of block it out. So usually what happens in that case is I will try a little technique, just a quick, simple technique, to try to deprogram it or try to advance the conversation on it. Now, there might be a bunch of different coaching tools, and depending on your coaching training, you might try some of these things like, how has that worked out for you? Or have you ever found that not to be true in your own experience, or whatever it might be? You might have some of these probing questions. But one of the things that I try to do is what I call the most, some, many type of deconstruction. And what I think is, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get people to not be afraid of being unique. And one of the reasons that I bring this up is that when you hear things like, I shouldn't waste my money on rent, I should try to buy a house, build up that equity so that I've lived rent free eventually and have this asset, right? Whatever it is, maybe it is, hey, you shouldn't just focus on the expense ratios of mutual funds. You should focus on what the right investment is for you and the net return, right? And the long-term performance, those types of things, whatever it might be. So in a lot of these cases, people don't want to go against the grain, even if they don't think it's generally a rule. They just want to be with the 90% of people that are following this rule. So what I will usually say sometimes is like, well, most people don't rent, if this is true, and you'd have to adjust this for whatever it is. But, most people don't want to rent and want to buy a house. But some people have thought about the differences about renting and owning over the long run. And many people have decided to rent and have found themselves to be financially successful despite that, right? So again, what I'm trying to do here is I'm saying that, yes, you are right that most people do what you are talking about. But some people, and I'm just trying to break that barrier down, saying that, okay, some people have chosen to be unique. And again, you want to be truthful on this, but some people have thought about doing something different and going against the grain and swimming upstream. And many of those people have found that to be a solution, that many people have found benefits to it, that many people found that's a right for them or appropriate for them, right? So it's a most, some, many kind of discussion that I have. And what I'm trying to say here is I understand your concern about breaking away from the pack. But some people have done it, and we want to acknowledge that, and that some of those people have also found success. So I am not trying to say, hey, you're wrong, to have this concern or to have this desire or to have a fear about being unique, right? But the fact that some of the people who have diverged have had some good success, right? The other technique that I will use, if we kind of get through that or don't get through that, maybe that doesn't work, is let the coachee, our client, go ahead and experience for themselves what they want to do, right? I mean, I don't own their actions, only they do. They ultimately have the right to overrule or veto me or do the exact opposite of what, I would like them to do. It's their life, right? We're here to coach them. We're here to help them execute their life, their desired path. And so what I would like to do is, in subsequent conversations and coaching sessions is say, how did that go, right? Because sometimes what they will do is they will find that it's not going well, but they kind of block it out as maybe I did something wrong, right? I maybe, in the rental situation trying to buy a house, maybe they got rid of the rental, they bought the first house they could find, and we want to see how that went, right? Did you get into a house that you think is the right thing for the long run? Did you get financing that you can afford, right? And a lot of times they might absolve themselves of things like, well, I'm on the bleeding edge of my budget. This isn't really a house I want, but it's building equity, right? It's an investment, right? They're not building any new real estate, right? So anyway, those types of things, and saying, hey, all right, now let's just talk about that. What are your thoughts? What are the good and the bad, right? What have you learned about this? And trying to connect the results that they are experiencing to the actions that they took and use that experience to have them maybe realize, hey, maybe this wasn't perfect. Maybe everything about this wasn't great. And maybe it's still 80% right. But of that 20%, what have we learned, right? And it can be about anything, right? I mean, I have worked with people who have, just wanted a new car. They don't really care about what they want, but they just want something reliable. And they get a car and they find a good deal on a color car that they don't really want. And 3 months later, they're like, I wish I hadn't bought that car. I don't really like green. It was a good deal, but now I've got this green car. I've got financing. I'm stuck with it. And I just don't really like green. So all right, it's not probably material to the issue in that. Does this mean you've made a bad decision? The car isn't the right fit for you? No, right? I mean, obviously they can, use that car for a long time, and it's probably going to satisfy their needs about reliability and safety and all these other things. But what we can do here is say, hey, we rushed into this, right? We didn't have the patience or the timeline or the flexibility to find exactly what we wanted. What did we learn from this, right? Well, we learned that maybe some of the smaller things that we prioritize lower are still important and need to be part of that discussion. So trying to follow up later and have them discover the relationship between hasty decisions or ignoring general advice or whatever it might be, or ignoring our specific advice, and saying, hey, what are the pros and cons of doing that? And then ultimately, what I want to say here is, for me, it's happened many times where, I've said, I don't know if that's the right thing to do, because actually, the math doesn't work out on that, or, that fund is very new, so it's hard to know what, their long-term performance is going to be, right? And that's not necessarily an indicator of anything, but maybe you don't want to get into something brand new that made the front page of a newspaper. Maybe you want to go with something more tried and true. And again, these are just conversations that we have, but ultimately, even if I have a strong opinion on something, I don't have the power of attorney, right? I can't sign on the line which is dotted. I can't move their money for them. I can't make the decisions. Ultimately, they have to do it. And so even when we go ahead and throw out our information, and if they ignore it, or if they don't do it, or don't do it full on or wholeheartedly, or whatever it might be, ultimately, we can't sweat that, right? I can't worry more about your money or your finances or your life than you do. If it's not important to you, despite the fact that it might be important to me, that I care, that I want the best for you, ultimately, I have to let that go. Because if it's not that important to you, or if it doesn't bug you, or if it's not critical for you, or doesn't take away from the happiness in your life, well, then I just have to live with that. And so it can be hard, especially when you want the best for clients, when you are working with them over a long period of time. But ultimately, you can't sweat it. You can't let it eat you up. And if people aren't going to do what you do, repeatedly, then again, you might go down the path of firing that client. Maybe it's not going to work out. Maybe they aren't ready for coaching. Maybe you aren't the right coach for them. And it's a moment that maybe we can just discover and realize that and come to grips with that. But ultimately, if we've tried all the things that we can from a coaching perspective, maybe being a little bit more direct with clients, but if they aren't going to use us as the resource that they are paying and hiring us for, then, what can we do about it? So part of it is to let the water shed off your back like a duck, because ultimately we do what we can and as much as we can. And then beyond that, it's out of our hands. So we can't let it eat us up too. But that's what I do when a client doesn't listen. And, hopefully maybe some of these ideas will help you when you reach that point with a client of yours. I will see you later.